Imagine a world where gold-plated gates and silk veils are the only things you have ever known. A world where your every movement is choreographed by ancient protocols, and your future is a pre-written script designed to serve the interests of a kingdom. For one young royal, this was not a fairy tale. It was a gilded cage that felt increasingly suffocating with every passing year. She was the pride of her nation, a symbol of purity and grace, whose face was plastered on currency and celebrated in every corner of the realm. But behind the serene smiles and the heavy weight of her tiara, a storm was brewing that would eventually lead her to the darkest, most unexpected place imaginable, the cold, damp corridors of a high-security prison.
Her journey began with a simple act of rebellion against the rigid expectations of her status. While her peers were focused on strategic alliances and high society galas, she found herself drawn to the stories of those who lived on the absolute fringes of society. It started as a charitable mission, a way to fulfill her royal duties while perhaps finding a glimmer of reality in a life defined by artifice. She chose to visit a facility that most people in her position would never acknowledge even existed. It was there, amidst the gray concrete and the clinking of iron bars, that she first locked eyes with a man who had no title, no wealth, and no future beyond the prison walls. He was a prisoner serving a sentence for a crime that many whispered was a setup by the very elite she represented.
The moment their eyes met, the invisible barriers of class and status seemed to dissolve into nothingness. He did not look at her with the rehearsed reverence of a subject or the predatory interest of a noble suitor. He looked at her as a human being, seeing the loneliness that she had spent years trying to hide. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. This initial encounter was supposed to be a one-time visit, a checkbox on her royal itinerary, but it turned into an obsession that would risk everything she had ever known. She began to arrange more frequent visits, masking them under the guise of prison reform initiatives and human rights advocacy. The royal court was pleased with her newfound dedication to social causes, never suspecting that their beloved princess was actually falling into a deep, forbidden romance.
Their secret meetings were conducted in low whispers and through the exchange of hidden notes passed between the pages of books. They shared their dreams, their fears, and the heavy burdens they both carried in their respective prisons, one made of stone, the other of gold. As their bond deepened, the princess began to realize that she could no longer return to the hollow life of the palace. The man behind bars had given her something that all the treasures of her kingdom could not buy, a sense of purpose and a love that was real. However, the world they lived in was not built for such a union. The royal family's intelligence network was vast, and it was only a matter of time before the whispers of her frequent, unescorted visits reached the ears of the king.
When the truth finally broke, it did not just cause a scandal, it sent a shockwave through the entire political structure of the nation. The idea of a royal heir consorting with a convicted felon was seen as an existential threat to the monarchy's legitimacy. The royal family moved quickly to contain the situation, attempting to whisk the princess away to a remote estate and tightening the security around the prisoner. They hoped that distance and silence would eventually snuff out the flame of their passion. But they underestimated the resolve of a woman who had finally tasted freedom. The princess refused to back down, publicly denouncing her titles and declaring that she would rather live in poverty with the man she loved than spend another day as a silent puppet of the state. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The media, once her greatest ally, turned into a predatory force, dissecting every detail of her life and painting the prisoner as a manipulative villain who had bewitched an innocent girl. The government launched a series of investigations into the prisoner's past, hoping to find enough dirt to turn the public against him. Yet, the more they pushed, the more the public began to sympathize with the star-crossed lovers. People who had grown tired of the perceived arrogance and detachment of the elite found a rallying cry in the story of the princess and the prisoner. It became a symbol of the struggle between the old guard and a new generation that valued authenticity over tradition. As the tension reached a breaking point, the princess made a move that no one saw coming. She used her remaining influence to secure a legal team that would reopen the prisoner's case, uncovering evidence of corruption and false testimonies that had led to his original conviction. This was no longer just a love story, it was a battle for justice that threatened to expose the dirty secrets of the nation's highest officials. The royal family found themselves trapped between their desire to protect their reputation and the growing demand for transparency. The spectacle drew international attention, with human rights organizations and foreign governments weighing in on the unfolding drama. The palace walls, once thought to be impenetrable, were now under siege from the very people they were meant to protect. In the midst of the legal battle, the princess continued to show up at every court hearing, sitting not in the VIP section, but among the ordinary citizens. She traded her designer gowns for simple clothes, a silent statement that she had moved on from her past life. Her presence was a constant reminder of the human cost of the rigid systems that had governed the country for centuries. The prisoner, emboldened by her support, found the strength to tell his side of the story, speaking of the systemic injustices that often targeted those without a voice. Their combined courage started a conversation that went far beyond their relationship, touching on issues of class, power, and the true meaning of loyalty. The turning point came when a whistleblower from within the security services leaked a series of documents that confirmed the princess's suspicions. The prisoner had indeed been framed by a rival political faction to prevent him from exposing a massive land-grabbing scheme involving several members of the nobility. The revelation was the final nail in the coffin for the old regime's credibility. The public outrage was so intense that the government was forced to grant the man an immediate pardon. However, the victory came with a heavy price. The princess was formally exiled from the royal family, stripped of her inheritance, and forbidden from ever entering the palace grounds again. For most, such a downfall would be a tragedy, but for her, it was the beginning of the life she had always wanted. On the day of his release, there were no cameras from the royal press office and no military escorts. There was only a woman waiting at the gate, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. When the doors finally opened and he stepped out into the sunlight as a free man, the world witnessed a moment of pure, unadulterated joy that surpassed any scripted royal wedding. They walked away from the prison together, disappearing into the crowd of a city that was now their own, to explore without the weight of expectations. The shock to the royal family was not just that she had left, but that she had succeeded in proving them wrong. They had built their entire identity on the idea that they were indispensable, that their bloodline made them inherently superior. Yet here was their brightest star, choosing to live a life of obscurity and hard work just to be with someone they considered lesser. It forced the remaining members of the family to look in the mirror and confront the cracks in their own foundation. Some attempted to follow her lead by pushing for modern reforms, while others retreated further into their isolation, fearing that the age of the monarchy was finally coming to an end.
Years later, stories are still told about the princess who gave it all away. Some say she lives in a small coastal village, working as a teacher while her husband runs a local business. Others claim they have seen her in the city, still advocating for those who have been forgotten by the system. While the palace has tried to erase her from the official history books, her legacy lives on in the hearts of the people. She became a legend not because of the crown she wore, but because of the courage she had to take it off. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that the most significant treasures are not found in vaults, but in the connections we make when we are brave enough to be ourselves. The royal family eventually had to adapt to a new reality where the public no longer accepted their word as law. The scandal opened the door for a series of legislative changes that limited the power of the throne and increased the accountability of the elite. In a strange twist of fate, the princess's act of betrayal actually saved the institution from total collapse by forcing it to evolve. Though she was never officially invited back, her influence was felt in every new policy and every step toward a more equitable society. She had traded a life of luxury for a life of meaning, and in doing so, she had changed the course of history for her nation. Looking back at the events that shocked the world, it is clear that the true shock was not the romance itself, but the power of a single individual to challenge a centuries-old system. It proved that love, when rooted in truth and justice, is a force that no wall can contain and no decree can silence. The prisoner who was once seen as a threat became a symbol of redemption, and the princess who was once seen as a puppet became a beacon of hope. Together, they showed that the boundaries we create between us are often just illusions, waiting for someone with enough heart to break them down. Today, the prison where they first met has been converted into a community center, a place of learning and growth rather than one of punishment and despair. It stands as a monument to the idea that everyone deserves a second chance and that beauty can be found in the most unlikely places. The princess and her husband are rarely seen in public, preferring to keep their private life away from the prying eyes of the world. But every once in a while, a young girl will look up at the statues of the old queens and hear the whispered story of the one who chose love over a throne. And in that moment, she realizes that her future doesn't have to be a pre-written script. She can be the author of her own story.